Thank you for joining us for Photo Eye Conversations. I'm Photo Eye's Gallery Director, Ann Kelly, and today we have with us photographer Ernie Button. How are you tonight, Ernie?
Hello, I'm doing all right, and how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for
Great.
joining me on a Saturday night.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you tonight, Ernie?
I am in Phoenix, Arizona, in my house. The Zoom background is a gallery show of mine a few years ago. Yeah, I'm not in a gallery right now. I'm actually in my wife's studio.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I'm hanging out in my backyard because we're still in the process of getting the new gallery organized. So in the near future, I will be back there.
I
Or
thought I heard chirping of some type of insect in the background there.
yes, I've got some crickets with me.
Oh, that's good.
So for anybody, yeah, so I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We've still got the crickets going. They're pretty pleasant.
Yeah, Phoenix, Arizona still has the heat going.
Yeah, it's been pretty hot there, hasn't it? I mean,
102
usually.
today. Well, it's usually hot, but this August was insanely hot. So many days over 110. It was pretty ridiculous.
I don't know how you do it.
Lots of air conditioning,
Yeah.
lots of praying for fall.
So for the past quite a few years now, has it been how many years have you been working on your Vanishing Spirits project?
Um, it's definitely been about 12 or 13. I've lost official count of how long it's been, but yeah, it's definitely over 12 years that I started it, that I first found the phenomenon. So yeah, it's been a while.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It really does. It really does. Yeah,
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Ernie's work, do you want to tell us a little bit how that project started and essentially what you're doing?
absolutely. The project, the official title of the project is Vanishing Spirits, the dried remains of single malt Scotch. And the discovery happened innocently enough. My wife and I were enjoying a glass of whiskey, and we left the glasses out overnight. And when I went to take the glasses to the dishwasher, I noticed this kind of grayish film at the bottom. And when I held it up to the light, there were these beautiful, really fine lines that have formed a pattern in the bottom of the glass. And I had just come off of a photography project with a painter friend of mine. She had collected agates, and she had always envisioned those as being some type of painting. And so I had the setup to be able to, do really close-up work and had the lighting all worked out. So I took that glass into my studio and just started experimenting. And that was the birth of Vanishing Spirits.
And you've always been interested in just kind of anything that might be potentially overlooked.
Yeah,
Average viewers just walking by and disregarding. And
absolutely. That was one of the major thesis of my serialism work. The portraits and landscapes made out of breakfast cereal is that these shapes that you're eating were actually quite humorous and quite photogenic when they were, set up to have their portrait taken, or, imagining them as a landscape or a sand dune or something like that.
and I've got a few of those images, so I'm gonna share those real quick because
Okay.
if you haven't seen this work, you should.
Oh, there you go.
Here we go. So this is our website, photoeye.com. You can go to our photographer showcase and see these images there.
Yeah,
So,
that was the Cheeriamids made out of stacks of Cheerios. And that was the shredded wheat bales, trying to imitate like an Iowa landscape, someplace where they would have hay bales out.
So how are you lighting these?
Um, with with those, I would create a tableau on my tabletop, and then I would blow up Arizona sunsets or skies and
Mm.
use them as the backdrop. And so I would have these big studio lights that I would reposition just to get the right, lighting. Um, yeah, so real simple lighting setup, no strobes or anything like that. And that was a more organic cereal that had round shredded wheat. Yeah. And again, an Arizona sky in the background.
And cereal, I mean, it's not necessarily overlooked, but well, it is. Normally, when you see cereal, you're just
You're
eating it.
focused on
You're
eating.
not.
Yeah. But a
So,
lot of my portfolios over the years have had that theme of things that if you're not paying closer attention, you may, overlook. One of an earlier portfolio before serialism was Back and Forth, the disappearance of the grocery store ride, where, I don't think I see one in front of a grocery store anymore, but some 20 years ago, they were in front of every grocery store, and now they've kind of disappeared.
it's a good point. I remember, yeah, they were like a quarter or 10 cents. And
Yeah. So I had created these diptychs of a black and white image of the grocery store ride. And then some 5, 10 years later, I went back and photographed the spot and photographed it in color where the ride used to be.
so,
And you can kind of see the evolution of these serialism in images. They started out very simple, very basic. And as I became more comfortable and confident in what I was creating, they did become more complex.
and then you started working with whiskey.
Yes.
Recently, barrel aged gin, as I understand it.
Yeah. Started out with whiskey, and there was some scientific research trying to better understand this phenomenon. It was published in 2016 in Physical Review Letters, which is a physics journal. And it's essentially saying that the organic material that has come from the barrel is what's really creating these patterns, really giving the chalk to outline these lines. And so my thought has always been, okay, it has to be a spirit, something that's high alcohol content. It has to be aged in a barrel to be able to possibly create these patterns. Um, but my budget is limited, so I can only buy. I really don't get many whiskeys from the distillers, and so it's all on my budget. Um, and I recently found, and I didn't know that this category existed, but yellow gin or barrel aged gin, because if you go down the gin aisle, it's mostly clear. But aviation gin, which is popular now because of Ryan Reynolds, who's a part owner, um, they came out with something called an aviation Old Tom gin, which is aged for a full year in a barrel. And so I'm like, I'll take a flyer on this. And I purchased it. And it made some of the best patterns that I've seen. And to me at least, and I shared them with some of my friends in the whiskey industry, they were able to tell a difference. There are some really bolder, stronger lines than in Scotch. So yeah, it was a revelation to me. And thinking back, it's like, well, okay, well, duh, that should at least possibly give you the hint of those patterns. I have not tried barrel-aged tequila, which I know is now a thing. But you know, something like wine doesn't produce these because it's not a high enough alcohol content.
Ah.
So it has to be that evaporation of the spirit and pretty quickly to be able to create these patterns.
So backing up a little bit, when you
Yes.
first started this project, as I recall, you were putting some glasses in the dishwasher and had noticed the little patterns from the dried
Yeah.
whiskey at the bottom, and you became instantly curious how those came to be. And the longer
Absolutely.
you looked at them, you noticed kind of like a snowflake. It never dried the same, right?
No, there's always a little bit of difference. And one of the things that I noted as this project was going along is that there were little mountains or little humps that were developing. And when I did some time-lapse photography, I noticed that it was creating those humps around a speck of dust. So that's really what Arizona being kind of the dust capital, there's lots of dust in the air, and a little speck of dust gets in there, and all of a sudden you've got this little hump. So yeah, they're constantly drying just a little bit different.
And you went as far to you started doing your own experiments because you wanted to understand this phenomena. And then you ended up approaching Dr. Stone from Princeton University, who also did some tests as well.
Dr. Stone is out of Princeton University,
Mm-hmm.
and he is in charge of the complex fluids group at Princeton University. And I was reaching out to Google is your best friend. I Googled
Yep.
fluid dynamics and pattern formation, and there were a couple names that came up, and his was toward the top of the list. Um, I did that because around that time, Dr. Peter Juncker had a research paper that became popular in the news because of the coffee ring effect. And he was the one that did the research into that. So I reached out to him initially and asked, you know, would your research apply to this? And he's like, I don't think so. So he couldn't help me at the time. And that's when I went to Google and I found Dr. Stone. Dr. Stone couldn't have been nicer. I mean, here this random person was asking him about why the Scotch pattern is happening. I freely admit I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physicist. I'm just a guy with questions. And he's like, let's explore, let's take a look. And so he found some of his team members that were willing and eager to be able to research this, and that really happened organically. You know, some people are incredulous that this, you know, well-known doctor in his area of specialty would do this, but he liked the question, he wanted to figure out the answer, and there were people on his team that were willing to participate. So I have nothing but praise for Dr. Stone. I've never met the man in person. I hope to someday.
How amazing is that, though? And then I mean, this work has been shown in the New York Times, NPR, and then scientific journals as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, the full.
Yeah, Scientific American, Smithsonian. One of the first was NPR, Boing Boing website. When it first hit the New York Times, that's when it really took off in various magazines. There was a second article in the New York Times about the completion of the research. This past July, there was a 7-page feature in National Geographic. So yeah, it's been around.
Something I've been thinking about a lot recently is just the connection between curiosity and creativity, or I don't know, it's a relatively new thought, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is, to me, it seems that this is a project born out of that. I mean, this wouldn't come to be if those were not two things that were true of you.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think mm, I want to say all artists, I'm going to say at least most artists are curious and asking questions and trying to figure out how do I visually represent the questions I have in my head. And you're trying to pour those out on whatever canvas you're using. And mine just happened to be about things that I'm seeing. And this one, thankfully, I was able to get some concrete answers. But yeah, it's born out of curiosity. It's born out of exploring, all of that.
And then this project eventually took you all the way to Scotland.
Oh yeah, we've my wife and I have fallen in love with Scotland. It's a beautiful place. If you've seen any of the landscape photography of many photographers that are taking pictures of Scotland, it's a truly wonderful place. People couldn't be nicer there. Everybody I've contacted there in the spirits industry has been very welcoming and very nice. So yeah, we've been to Scotland, I think 8 or 9 times.
And you ended up collaborating with Macallan on a limited edition Scotch presentation box. I don't know what the terminology is for that. I've never seen anything like it, but we purchased one at the gallery, and unfortunately that was a few years ago, so all the Scotch is gone, but we still have a bottle, and it comes with a cool little stopper. And,
I'm a big believer that Scotch should be drunk, shouldn't be saved. So I'm glad that it was enjoyed and it's gone. Yeah, in 2000, I think it was 2014, just before the research article was announced in the New York Times, I started a conversation with a guy by the name of Ken Greer. He was at the time running the Macallan, and he had this really cool, it was a feature or a special portfolio of photographers that were represented on the Macallan boxes. It was a limited edition type of purchasing. And Macallan does a lot of those type of special boxing, special presentations. And so this was kind of right in line with what they were doing. And it was called the Masters of Photography. And they had, I think there were 6, maybe 7 that were included in the main line of the Masters of Photography. Albert Watson was one, Elliot Irwin was one. And what they would do for that is they would create a special whiskey for them. And then they would have some type of special, like Elliot Irwin got a book. He went around Scotland to different parts of it and just did what Elliot Irwin does, is taking snapshots of people in pubs, people with dogs, people, I forget exactly how many photographs were in the book, but they did, if I remember correctly, there were 50 different bottlings. And so you get a print with that particular bottling. And they would put the small little flask in a book. So it was carved out of the book, and then you get that print with the book. When they created their new distillery, they got, I think it was 6 of the Magnum photographers to go and do their perspective of the Macallan distillery build. And one was Alex Soth. I forget some of the others, but they created a book out of that, and they had, for their new distillery, they created a gallery. And so they had gallery prints up there. So anyway, getting back to my collaboration, they had what's called a capsule edition, where it was a smaller release. Nick Vesey, who does the X-ray photography, he had a capsule edition. Dado Moriyama, he had a capsule edition, and I had a capsule edition as well. And so for mine, it was 12 different images on boxes that were sold internationally at duty-free stores. So in England, there was the Macallan 12, and it was a blue box, and it sold out quite nicely. When I went over there for the Speyside Whiskey Festival, I signed like 50 boxes and those sold pretty quickly. So it was pretty exciting.
It's just a really cool collaboration
It
generally.
really is. And just the fact that Ken was so honoring of the photographic arts. He was really trumpeting and a backer, a lover of the photographic arts. That was refreshing to see in the whiskey industry. So I feel very fortunate that I was even a small part of it. Didn't get my own whiskey, but I was still part of the quote Masters of Photography series.
You got your photo on the box, and I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, in their new distillery, they've displayed all of the whiskeys that they had in storage, the like from 1935 or 42. And so you have like millions of dollars of whiskey on this wall. And up in the upper right-hand corner, my limited edition is up there. So I've got a place in the pantheon of the McAllen Distillery. So that's pretty special.
I mean, I'm sure that was not even in your mind 10 years ago or so when you made your
Absolutely not.
first image. Did you think you'd
Absolutely
be
not.
going to, yeah, hang out with those guys and you'd be, yeah, no, any of those things. So that's where creativity and curiosity takes you.
Yeah, it really can. Yeah, which is nice to see. Yeah, I mean, one can dream, but to be able to even come close to those dreams is pretty exciting.
No, you can't plan that. And one of the things that's also really cool about your work, particularly in these current times, is that so many of your images are made while traveling, but um, a majority of your work, or half of your work at least, is can be made anywhere or
Yeah,
home. You don't have to travel to
absolutely.
get
Yeah, I enjoy being in the studio just as much as I enjoy traveling. Um, Now I long to travel because we can't, but
there. Of course.
um, yeah, being in the studio is peaceful to me. It's solace. It's being able to just focus on what I'm doing. And, I still do a little bit of other photography in my studio, but a lot of it is the whiskey work. And, when whiskey dries in the glass, it still has the smell. It still has the bouquet. So I'm still able to smell the whiskey when I'm working. So that's kind of a nice bonus.
Little reminder of Scotland.
A little reminder of Scotland. Absolutely.
So recently, you've been experimenting with some different spirits. I've got some images you sent me of some Japanese rice whiskey. Is that the
Yeah,
proper
yeah.
term?
I, as far as I know, and I don't know a lot about Japanese whiskey, so um, if
Other
this is
than what it
slight,
looks like.
yeah. So if this is slightly incorrect, don't be too harsh on me. But I
Right.
don't think all Japanese whiskey is made of rice. I think there are some that are made with conventional barley. But there was a startup roughly around March. There was a startup company that was making a Japanese whiskey. They wanted to send me samples and see if I could make some artwork out of it and potentially do a collaboration. There's nothing official as far as a collaboration, but my theory is I need samples to be able to see if this will work. Because if I can't make images out of them, well, a collaboration is moot. It's pointless. So I asked for some samples and they sent me 3 different samples of whiskey. And what we're looking at right now on the label was a 10-year-old bourbon cask whiskey. And so when I looked at that, I'm like, oh, that's going to be awesome because it's aged enough to be able to give me those patterns. And I went in thinking that it's going to be very much like Scotch.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't know is that the grain used in this particular whiskey was a rice. I've never worked with rice whiskey, so I didn't know what I was looking at. So when I saw these patterns, I'm like, oh my, what is this? And
Mm-hmm.
just time after time, it gave me these really fluid, organic, ribbon-like patterns that were just, I found them fascinating. And so, yeah, this is a rice-based whiskey. And really, these are about, I found the happy place of about 5 drops, out of an eyedropper. If I put in like 10 drops, 20 drops, it wouldn't leave me anything like this. If it was 1 or 2 drops, not enough information. So really the sweet spot was 5 drops. And that's what I was getting. So
So
I just found, yeah, I
I'm
just
not
found
an
it fascinating.
expert on pottery, but does this not look to you like pottery from Japan? I know
Oh,
I
absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder if they knew something back then that that I'm just finding out. But
yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's so fascinating that this is how they organically dried.
yeah, it's kind of amazing. Because I've yeah, I'm certainly not an expert in Japanese um scotches or whiskeys or pottery, but I mean,
Absolutely.
it was
Yeah.
just the second I saw these, I thought, wow, I mean, it just takes me right there. So,
Yeah, there's so many things that you could think that they look like. To me, they look a little bit like shaved stones or small little jewels, or um, yeah, they're just. I was very surprised and very pleased with what happened.
I love that. And how did it compare? I'm assuming bleh, I'm assuming you tasted it.
Yeah, yeah. It, it was a good whiskey.
Hmm.
It was different than Scotch. Scotch has a little bit more complexity, a little bit more mouthfeel than this did. Still very good. My wife likened it to her grandmother's ribbon candy,
Hmm.
the taste on the palate. So she was pleasantly surprised with how wonderful it tasted. And she's really the Scotch expert of the family. She's one of those super tasters.
Mm.
Um, when you read about tasting notes, when you read about the smell on the nose, when you read about the palate, she's able to taste all that. So I oftentimes will say, okay, what'd you taste? What'd you feel?
We should have her here as the conversation or conversation
Absolutely.
follow
Well,
up or
she
something.
would be giving us the tasting notes,
Hmm. Yeah,
a
yeah.
virtual tasting, yes.
And then let's see, got the
Oh yeah, have you
gin.
the aviation gin? Is that what you're searching for?
Yes, I've got it right here. Um,
So when you look at these particular patterns, you can see the lines appear much bolder than some of the other patterns that are produced by Scotch. If you scroll up to like images 1 and 2, yeah, like that one,
There we go. A little fast. Okay.
that's okay. Um, but you can see starting that, a lot of those lines are a little bit bolder, a little bit whiter than some of the Scotch images. And it's not necessarily a different lighting technique. It's just how the organic material is drying and then the light reflecting off of it, which was very interesting that not only I could see it, but as I mentioned, some of my other colleagues were able to see the difference.
Oh, do you want to address the lighting a little bit?
Sure.
We hadn't discussed that.
In lighting these, I don't use a fancy rig. I use different colored flashlights, and I have a full array of plastic discs, colored discs that go the gambit of the rainbow. And when I get my lights positioned, um, I can hold up a disc to change how that color reads in the glass. Like this particular image, you can see how bold those white lines are compared with other scotches, which is just more fine-tuned and more subtle. And it may be just, you know, the fact that it's only a year in the cask that it's getting the boldness and it doesn't have the depth and the complexity that something in there for 10 years would have. Um, but yeah, getting back to the lighting, it's a lot of subtle movements trying to create depth in these really shallow, seemingly two-dimensional patterns. So really trying to bring out the center of that where it's looking more landscapey, more mountainous.
So we've got a number of local distilleries here in New Mexico. We might need to send you some
We might need to hook up with them.
spirits, or even better, if you could come out here and check them out. But
Absolutely.
maybe
Yeah.
in the near future.
Well, I did go to Review Santa Fe last year.
That was
October.
the last time I saw you. It was about
Yeah.
a year ago. I was thinking about that earlier today.
Yeah, and just didn't have enough time to hit the distilleries there.
Well, you had an agenda. So,
Yeah,
portfolio reviews.
yeah.
How many have you been to?
I have been to Photo Lucida 3 times, I think. 2005 was my first one. Then I think it was 2009, 2011. I went to Review Santa Fe in, was it 2006? And then last year. So I've been to Review Santa Fe twice. And then I went to Filter Festival in Chicago. And I think that was 2016. And they're fascinating. They're fascinating to go to. You know, the first couple I went to were, they're challenging, you know, because you really have to put your ego aside and take whatever the reviewer is giving you, you know, and you may read their bio and think that they're into this particular work, but they're into something slightly different, you know. So it's definitely an interesting process. I recommend, you know, if any photographer is serious about their photography and showing, do it. It's a great opportunity. Check your ego, listen to what they have to say, because you will learn about what people are thinking about, how to get into their museum or their gallery or their magazine. Yeah, it's really worthwhile.
Well, and within 2 days, you can meet with book publishers, museum curators, photo editors, just kind of the full gamut of places your work could appear in. So you really get a wealth of information. And
Absolutely.
in 2020, there's a lot of online portfolio reviews.
Yes.
So I've done one of those so far, and I'm doing another one coming up next month. And because you don't have to travel, they're a bit more affordable.
Yes.
They're different because, well, obviously they're different because it's all through Zoom. So there's a little bit of disconnect, but I've seen some advantages. But I would say if anybody's listening and interested in doing a portfolio review, what I'm seeing so far is they're typically a little bit more affordable. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, those portfolio reviews in person can get pricey because you have to travel there, you have to stay in a hotel, you have to pay the entrance fee. So yeah, it's definitely you're dedicating your time and money to do that. So you're absolutely right. You know, Zoom is great.
Yeah, as we're finding out.
Yeah.
So I've got one more PDF here, or another selection of images that you sent. And these ones are a little different, I feel like, than some of the other images.
Oh, those, yes.
What is going on here?
So after, I want to say at least 5 years of working on this project, my question was then, okay, when do these things start? When is there enough organic material in the cask to be able to create these patterns? Um, I know that they have to have some type of organic material in there, but does it happen after a week? Does it happen after a month? Um, in in the distilling process, depending upon what environment you live in, will depend on how quickly a whiskey matures. Um, there's a pretty well-known distillery down in Tucson, which is 100 miles south of Phoenix, called Whiskey Del Bac. And we took a tour there, and they aged their whiskey, if I remember correctly, for only about 18 months, and it's done.
That's
And
really
so,
quick, isn't it?
yeah, and it's because of the temperature. The higher the heat, the faster the cook. With Scotland, it's pretty cold. Ironically, I was checking out the weather, lusting after being in Scotland, and Glasgow was 38 degrees. So much colder, so a much slower cook. So I I was able to get these samples from Brian Kinsman, who's the master distiller over at Glenfiddich. He was kind enough to give me a range of week-old samples. So this particular one was aged in a cask for 5 weeks. And so you can see the start of the organization of the lines. At the bottom of the image, you can see more a buildup and more of less of a line pattern, but more of that mountainous landscape type at the bottom. And through the middle, you can see those lines forming. So as it ages in the cask, it's going to start to fill out. Um, I did get a sample from like a 6-month-old cask, and that's fully forming the images like what you've seen in my Scotch work. So I'm really curious to get a line of whiskeys 1 week apart from a singular cask, because every cask is slightly different and is going to age just a little bit differently. So that's my next goal, is to get like from 1 week to 8 weeks. But this was a 5 week old in a cask. The new make spirit starting to commingle with the organic material from the cask. And it's just giving these really hints of what it's going to do in the future.
So when I look at work like this, it can't, I mean, I have the honor of getting to see a lot of photography. I love that. But one of the things I start noticing is that a lot of times micro images or just images of little close-up details start mimicking aerial photographs, and you just start seeing all these repetitions in nature, and I just find that fascinating.
Yeah, it is really fascinating that the micro can be the macro and vice versa. Something like this, the previous black and white image reminded me of like a Japanese painting distilled to the black and white. And this is very reminiscent of that. It just happens to be the colorized version. Just these hills starting to grow. And again, just the embryonic hint of what it's going to develop into. I find that fascinating. And this is one of the more really successful images. It was one that was in the National Geographic feature, but the whole concept is vanishing spirits, and there you've got kind of a ghostly image.
So I was checking out the National Geographic feature earlier today, again, just to get ready for this. And they also included a guy that was making pancakes. Do I have it right? There were pancakes at the end. I didn't actually get to finish it, but
Yeah, I saw
made
that and I'm like,
pancakes.
huh,
Did
yeah.
you make the pancakes? Because they included a recipe.
Yes, I did see that. Yeah. And then I think they included the guy that had the frying pans and they made them look like planets.
Oh, I must
Um,
have missed that part. But
yeah, the whole thing was, the 50 years of the lunar landing. So all these takes on different ways to make planets.
yeah, this project has had a really quite a far reach, I gotta say.
Yeah, it has been fascinating to me, and I'm glad that the public has enjoyed it because I would probably still make them if the public didn't like them because it's like I said, it's very Zen-like for me. It's very fascinating, and it ties in with my wife and I's love of whiskey. So
Well, and I really believe that's where great art comes from. You make it regardless if you think people are gonna like it or not. It's all out of the love
absolutely,
of the thing. You're not sitting around making these thinking, oh, how much am I going to sell them for? And they are for sale. You can
yes,
go
they are for
to
sale.
photoeyeconversations and you can buy prints of them, but that's not why you're doing it to begin
That's really not the motivation. Yeah.
with. Yeah, exactly.
And these are all the 5 week old in a cask. Um, you can see how they're starting to develop, and each one has their own character. And yeah,
So,
they're the older ones.
um, how did you actually end up? What was your introduction to photography? How did all of this begin?
um, as a kid, my brother and I chipped in for a Canon AE1. I forget exactly how old we were, but we were in our single digit years. And we both saved and we both bought it jointly. And I was fascinated. I started taking pictures from that point forward. This is a little bit embarrassing to say, but I never knew that there was such a world as galleries and museums and places where you can show your work and express yourself through putting images on a wall, crafting a portfolio based around that. And I didn't know that until my wife went to grad school and she started studying fine art painting. And I'm like, oh, okay. There is this world that I really didn't know about. Um, we were super poor. She was going to grad school and I was, working odd jobs, and she needed slides taken of her work to get into grad school. And so we didn't have the hundreds of dollars to hire a photographer. So we both went to community college to learn the basics of photography. And that's how I started. She had to drop out because of school commitments, and I continued on. And that's where it kind of took hold. So that was the start of my photography career.
And you haven't been able to stop since.
I have not been able to stop since.
Yeah, not a bad thing.
Knowing that I was going to be talking with you, I was thinking about my start, and the whole dark room and how we don't use dark rooms anymore. And that one of the possible reasons why I love this Vanishing Spirits project is it's kind of like watching a print develop. You're going to see what the mystery of what this is going to turn into. And, when you see your first couple prints develop in the developer, it is magic. It is fascinating. And it has a particular smell, the Dectal and the developer. And you're like, that you're in the dark room. And, with the Vanishing Spirits, I know I'm in my studio and I'm watching something amazing happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's so many of the stories of how people got into photography. You hear that, being in the dark room and seeing that print develop, and
Absolutely.
it is pure magic. That's how I got into it myself.
Yeah.
And it's just a really special thing. And there is Well, you don't see a lot of universities are doing away with actual darkroom classes, which I find to be pretty sad. I mean, not digital photography has so many advantages, but I just
Absolutely.
I
It definitely loses something, and you lose a little bit of the craft of learning all the parts of photography.
mhm,
Digital obviously has a place, and it's an important way to make work, but I don't know if I would have been the photographer that I am without that.
exactly. I feel that way. Absolutely. Um, but I think it's a really interesting time for photography. Darkroom photography is still happening.
Sure,
There's all of
absolutely.
these interesting digital evolutions. A lot of people are going back to the earliest processes. There's hybrid processes. I think there's just a lot of really exciting things happening. And then
Absolutely.
I'm thankful for people like you who are out there who are curious and creative and observing the little things and you've taken this whole Vanishing Spirits mission on a 10-year plus exhibit. You know, I don't feel like you're done. I think there's more to discover.
I
So
don't think I'm done either.
that's exciting. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Um, do you have any other artistic influences? Do you look at other
Um,
photographers' works, painters, anybody else, even music?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, you know, beyond my wife being an influence of mine, um, some of the first photographers that I was introduced to and really became kind of a touchstone for me, Ed Weston's work of shooting the buildings and the streets really helped to inspire the back and forth work of the disappearing grocery store rides. Um, David Leventhal was a huge influence on my early work, and I still love what he does. Um, I did a portrait of my toys that I grew up with, you know, Fisher Price toys, the little people. Um, you know, and if David Leventhal wasn't doing what he was doing, I may not have explored that part of my photography. Um, I'm a huge fan of music, and it's important in what I do. And you know, some of my favorites, U2. I've been to many of their shows. Muse, they're a fantastic band. Um, Big fan of, I'm going to say DJ music, but not EDM. You know, people like Kid Koala and DJ Shadow, really creating an art and a soundscape. Big, big fan of that. As far as painters, you can't beat a Rothko. I've been fortunate enough to see Rothko in person and to be able to stare into the canvas and watch the colors change and watch certain parts become alive and other parts. It's definitely an optical illusion, but it's magical to watch happen. Um, I'm a fan of Picasso's work. I always have been. You know, those are the ones that come to mind right now. Yeah,
Well, there's so many amazing, inspiring people in this world.
absolutely. Agreed.
Seems like you're honed into some great ones. And if you're not able to come back in the near future, but I think you will,
Yes,
we'll have to send you some spirits. It's just
absolutely. I look forward to it. Yes.
hopefully review Santa Fe 2021 um, or just whenever. But you're
Yeah.
only a state away, so I feel like
I'm very close.
we might
We've driven it. It's about an 8 hour drive. It's a full day's drive, but yeah, the flight is like 40 minutes. It's very
don't have to
close.
get on an airplane anyways. So
Exactly. Yeah.
well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will have some, well, We've got a great selection of Ernie's work on our website. Go check it out there. Also go to the Photo Eye blog, which is where this conversation is going to be. There's also some earlier written interviews that you can find on there. Oh, and in addition to that, Photo Eye Editions, we did a limited edition portfolio of Ernie's work, which is a great way to collect the work. It's a really beautiful production. Do you have anything to say about the Photo Eye Editions portfolio?
No, I was going to say that it really was, it turned out fabulous. It's a fantastic looking portfolio. And, you know, it is a bargain because you get 10 prints for 1,500. Is that it?
I think so, something like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and
But yeah, I was really pleased with how it turned out.
we didn't skip any details on that one.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous production. So kind of the reason we started Photo Eye Editions originally, and there's only a few portfolios, was so that someone could actually acquire a full collection of work by one artist at about the price point they'd maybe be paying for one print. And it's an art object into itself. So within the description of this, we'll include a link to that so you can check that out.
Perfect.
But go to our website, check out Ernie Button's work, read the previous interviews. He's doing some fantastic things. Check out Serialism. Check out the new work. There's a portfolio that's Planet Whiskey, right?
Yes. Yeah, where I shaped some of the images into planet-looking objects. So the Vanishing Spirits has always been kind of celestial, kind of had that outer space feel. And so for me, it was kind of a natural leap or a natural evolution to shape some that were already looking planet-like into more of a sphere, more of a planet. So yeah, I was really pleased with how those turned out.
Which, yeah, we haven't actually even talked about, but I mean, so many of them just look like outer space.
They really do. Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. And so behind you, you've got some framed prints, or
yeah,
the illusion
background
of some framed prints.
Yes. Yeah, and the ones, let's see, on this side, those are included in the Vanishing Spirits, I'm sorry, the Macallan edition, part of the portfolio editions. Those were images that were used on the boxes. So the prints, the 10 prints, were the images that I turned into Macallan, and you're getting the full print. Obviously not the box. But I think those were used in Russia. So those images were used on the Russian boxes.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yes.
So yeah, are those still available, the actual boxes, the capsules?
I think they have been sold out.
Yeah, okay, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
We're holding on to our box. We actually, we recently moved and we've got it on display, so.
Nice. Yeah, I don't have a full set of boxes, but I've got, I think, 6 or 8 of them. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ernie. Really appreciate you for joining us and for making this work and everything that you do. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this conversation. If you have any questions, please email me. I'm happy to advise on collecting, telling you anything you might want to know about Ernie's work. I'd love to talk to you. So please get in touch and we will continue the conversation. And thank you, Ernie. And I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Amy. Good to talk to you.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.